Should be.
Do I need to send them?
I sent you a Facebook message with a link. So see if that pops up. And we should be good to go.
Okay. Where's the camera?
I'm gonna use that computer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna call Dr. Castellano.
That'll work.
Good?
Yep.
Okay. How are you? You're getting better, I'm glad. Oh my, that's not very calm. I mean that you're doing better. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna have to put you on speakerphone and we'll get started, okay? All right. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. We're gonna go ahead and get started. And since we have some guests this time, I thought we might do some brief introductions. So, Justin,
Sure.
you want to sort of take ours for a second?
That'll work.
Get folks
Let me
in
see
the
where I'm
room.
putting. I'm gonna put this right here.
Yeah.
That'll work.
And then we'll get started with the formal part of the defense.
Make sure I got all my technology off. All right. Okay. Justin Grimes, fourth year doctoral candidate, College Student Affairs Administration program. Thank y'all for being here.
Oh, Tamika Oliphant, fiance.
And please,
Doctoral candidate. That's all.
Ian Parker, I'm a fourth year student and I'm pursuing a PhD in education.
I'm Cedric, third year doctoral student in the LLOD program, research interests, African American male doctoral students, and whatever.
Jason Mizell, third year doc student in language and literacy. My focus areas are Afro-Latino children's literature and bilingual education.
Bernard Green, first year doc student in CASA. I'm glad to be here. Jason Wallace, second year College Student Affairs Administration program.
Marlon Gibson, second year CASA. I'm just glad to be here as well. Yes.
And Dr. Castanel is on the phone. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Louis Castanel, and I just retired from the University of Georgia, and I am happy to be here. I'm really excited about Justin's work, and I still am able to follow my other students who should be graduating in May of this year, so hopefully Justin and those students will all march and be good at this May.
All right.
I'm Chris Linder, and I'm an associate professor in the College Student Affairs program.
And I'm Darius Means. I'm an assistant professor in CASA.
All right.
So thank you all for coming. Before we get started, we need to ask folks who are not on the committee to step out of the room for just a few minutes for the committee to confer, and then everyone can come back in and we'll get going with the defense.
The microphone.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I'm gonna just take it off. I'm gonna just take it with me. Just take it with me.
We'll take that.
Take it with us.
It won't be very
Yes, that's fine.
How you doing? Hey, what's going on? It's good to see you. Likewise, you go into the
All right, y'all.
Change it. Do you know
What?
how to change the,
So while I got a forum,
so it doesn't go to
you
sleep?
guys are familiar.
Who, it went to sleep?
It may, if I'm not sitting right there by it, hit me.
Do you have your charger?
Why haven't you guys been? Well,
Yeah.
I did.
Then if we put it, okay, I can take care of that. Or somebody be next to me.
You gonna knock it out?
Or do you want to hold it and look at it from your angle, from where you're sitting?
I'll just move to that seat in between.
Okay.
Everybody.
Hey, everybody. Hope y'all doing well. So what just happened is you have to step outside first and allow people the committee to convene and figure out what questions they're going to ask. And I'll come back, do the presentation, and then I'll step back out one more time and they'll decide whether or not confirm. So that's what's happening. Hope y'all excited. It's fun.
We've been doing.
And there's a group meeting going on out here. Like everybody.
So my idea is do a day on the calendar, whosoever can make it. and maybe more frequently. And kind of have people come in now.
What's that? That means people can view. That means y'all can view. Good.
What does CASA stand for?
College Student Affairs.
I want anybody else out there texted.
How many tracks they are?
Just two. Yeah. So I think that program, they're also called counselors.
Yeah, we're counseling and student personnel services. Yeah. P16.
Yeah, okay, yes.
It started for school counselors instead of higher ed folks, but now we have a mix of both.
Yeah, I actually looked at that. I ran out of the building.
Can you see it? Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Great.
It's like you have to walk on water.
I hope I don't talk too fast. I ramble through my words, but I'm gonna try to be calm and work my way through this.
I think that's a part of it.
Not the social justice. It's not part
I
of
know, I'm excited. Now that this technology piece is good, I'm ready. We can talk.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Why are you
His parents.
Listen,
And then
I had this
family
battle.
with
Me and you talked about it. I had this battle. I said,
microaggression.
it's my costume.
It's custom.
My costume. And so who was I talking to? Joan. And we were talking about it. And hey, Joan, tell me the story we were talking about.
John, he's talking about
In
you.
the formal aspect of it, it's kind of a formal presentation at the university. So this is a formal event. It's supposed to be more formal.
Now he's talking about you.
I got a fresh pair of J's I want to rock. I can't do it right now. I'm away.
You can put them on afterwards.
I can't.
I can't remember today. And I have a tie on. And the sweater on. He knows what I'm talking about.
Let's get this party started.
All right.
Time to get the party started.
Exactly.
Oh, was it right here? I'm gonna infiltrate y'all's mail lineup so I can make sure it don't go to sleep.
Keep it here just in case I need to use it. It's over there where you can't see me. All right. Okay. So first of all, thank you all for coming. Deadline is bright. So thank you all for coming. For those who are watching online, thank you for watching. Family, friends who are watching online who can't be here, but I'll see many of y'all next week. So thank you. So I'm here to talk about my dissertation, motivating factors impacting Black men's pursuit of a degree in education. And so I won't be before you very long talking about the dissertation, but before I get started, I at least wanted to provide my thank yous to my chair, Dr. Chris Linder, thank you, the committee members, Dr. Darius Means and Louis Casanel, as well as University of Georgia Graduate School Deans of the World. We can get money. We're supposed to acknowledge the people who get money. So I can make sure I fulfill that requirement. And as well as to my family, friends, and peers. There's something on that screen I have to do something. All right, so a little bit of information about the participants in this study. This is just the individuals and a little bit about their background, and I'll kind of get into more about what happened in the study and less about the individual's background, but I thought it was important to at least show you this slide with information about their backgrounds, including their social identities, their research interests, as well as other important social identities that they decided to share with me. So, the purpose and the reason why you're here is to talk about these research questions. Thank you. So I wanted to know what factors did Black male students name to be the primary motivators for their pursuit of a doctoral degree? I also wanted to know how did race, gender, and gender impact Black male doctoral students' motivation throughout their educational journey. This kind of started with a class, with Dr. Castanel's class, the motivation class, last fall. And so we had a paper that we had to write, and this wound up formulating into the dissertation that I'm going to talk about today. So first, I'm going to talk about the main points. So, what motivates Black men to pursue doctorates? And I want to start with a quote one of the participants said. He said, "Education and social justice combat racist practices. Education can improve both social mobility, and because I want to make more money to provide for my family, I think wealth in the Black community starts with wealth in the Black family. So the more money I make, the more money the Black community can make, and that's how I look at it. I don't look at it as me getting a PhD for me. I look at it as me getting a PhD for me to benefit other people who do not have their PhD, and hopefully inspire them to get their PhD as well, or an advanced degree. So this really highlights each aspect of what was showing up. So family was a major influence. Everybody talked about parental influence, mothers, fathers, as well as sons. Some people who study are husbands and fathers, so they talked about their son being a great influence. They also talked about wives and husbands being a great influence for them. And a lot of this is also about honoring your ancestors. So they talked about the significance around, at one point, Black people weren't even allowed to read and write as slaves. So that really stood out to the Black men, that I realized that before I could even do this, somebody had to make some sacrifices for me to be able to pursue this PhD, which was very important to them. And I'll talk about the fear of failure, but credentialing. Most of this is about getting the credentials. So it's one thing to say, I as Justin have this idea, or I as Justin can be able to share information, but Dr. Justin can carry it a lot further. And just me and my name by itself echoes, confirms that. And so for some people, it's also about career. So they need the credentials to be able to advance in their career wherever they want to go next. And the fear of failure. So what happened with fear of failure is some imposter syndrome showed up around fighting for perfectionism, concerns about whether or not they were able to perform it the way they want to, and sometimes seeing themselves in a position where they question whether or not people think they can do this. And that really translated into an internal set of first they internalized that message, which is kind of the internal intrinsic motivator, which is I need to then prove to myself that I can do this, and then prove to others. But it's that voice and those constant narratives to hear from people about, why are you here? You sure you're not here for athletic reasons? Why are you in this PhD? How did you choose this program? So that still was the drive. So although it's a very oppressive statement and has a lot of internalized oppression for Black men, it also was a greater source of pushing them to go forward to pursue. And ultimately, it's all about social justice. So each of the Black men talked about wanting to correct some injustices happened in their educational journey at some point. Whether it was a teacher that said they were questioning whether or not they could do it, whether they've seen some injustices. Some people talked about policies and how they question whether or not the way that we test students is really sufficient and really gets at the heart of how they're able to perform and display their abilities to do well. So that's kind of the main things and what's driving Black men to pursue. Black men also had a very unique relationship, important relationship with Black women. And so they talked a lot about how Black women had a great impact on their decision to pursue. Particularly, it was Black women who told them about how to get into a PhD program, told them about a CV, how to reach out to faculty members, how to write a professional email, as well as it was the ones who were supporting and mentoring them both before and while they're still pursuing their PhD. And the visibility of having Black women present is very important to each person. The struggle. So what happened is one of the questions you see before I said, I wanted to know about race and gender. So what was happening for you as a Black man in your educational journey? Black separate from gender. We can talk about Black all day. Black men can go through a lot of things that happen here related to race. But when it came to gender, there was a struggle to really name what was happening. There was a lot more invisibility. So for them, it was easier to name challenges of race, but what they talked more about was their performance of masculinity in the classroom. So how am I showing up in a space when I'm the only male, or I may be one of very few males in the space? That's the only instance in which this gender piece came up for them, especially in the relationship with Black women. If there were two or more Black women, and they were looking for ways to have space to feel like they can be emotional and vulnerable in that space, they felt challenged that they couldn't be able to talk about what they were experiencing or feeling in the ways that Black women did. So one participant talked about how, he said there's always space for Black women to be able to have their emotions and their feelings, but as a Black man, which sparks my thoughts around, okay, so what is it like when it's just you as a Black man and there's white women or white men present or other racial and ethnic groups that are experiencing the same thing? So that was kind of some of the challenges around understanding male privilege and being able to name that. And so I think that's one of the future areas I want to look into a little more, which is how does masculinity or manhood show itself up in Black men's pursuit of a PhD. Last point I want to talk about is Black men refer to themselves as sub-others. And I want to give another quote to really kind of set up what this sub-othering piece was. So one of the participants said to me, they do some type of what I call sub-othering. Like you're Black, where I'm going to still look at you from a deficit because you're Black. But I'm going to sub-other you in that you're not the average Black that I'm normally marginalizing. You're going to get a PhD, so you're probably an affirmative action PhD. You're probably one of the ones who has been socialized enough in our white culture where you can have the tools to succeed in that space, but you're a sub-other. So I came up with saying that basically what's happening is Black men are given this title of sub-other based on a lot of microaggressions and racism that was taking place, as well as some fear. But one of the things that I wrestle with, which is how are Black men using this sub-other to gain advantages? And so one of the things I wrote down about sub-other is that it's rooted in assumptions that Black men pursuing doctorates are less threatening to white people than the normal Black individuals outside that are deemed as aggressive, angry, incompetent, lazy, some of the stereotypes that are thrown out there about them. But the most important thing is that they have to be able to speak the language and perform whiteness in the ways that white individuals see it, which can do a lot and say a lot to them. And so this includes in the ways that they dress, in the ways that they speak, how they write, how they internalize those messages going forward. Sub-othering ignores the ways that racism not only affects perceptions about Black men, but also how it impacts how white people use credentialing to give Black men opportunities. So if I consider you in a position where you're not as threatening, I can say, oh yeah, you need to join this research team, or hey, you should be able to pursue this PhD, or you can achieve this process. So that was happening. Now the main points is the implications. So I'm asking for institutions, graduate administrators, student affairs, and graduate faculty to consider the following. So I want to talk about what can we do going forward. So one thing is to restructure policies and recruitment efforts tailored towards the needs of Black men. So one of the things is usually when Black men are pursuing PhDs, they're looking at recruitment weekends, right? Many of us probably in this room attended some recruitment event or we watched some recruitment event online. And one of the things I'm asking people to do is to consider how they're pairing students together. So I say you should compare Black students with other Black students, undergrad and grad, and as well as students who are non-Black, to get a really holistic picture of what it means to be a Black man. But it's important for Black men to be able to have this relationship with other Black men that are currently in the academy, to be able to talk about what are the challenges, how are you supported, what are things you think I need to know before I decide to pursue this PhD. In addition, I want people to consider the messages that are displayed or told to Black men. Some of the participants talked about recognizing Bridgetown as the institution, the pseudo version that I've created of the institution, talking about seeing Confederate flags, talking about reading about the desegregation of the institution and how that already conveyed to them what racism was going to look like. And one person said, I'm concerned about what type of racism I'm going to experience. Is it going to be physical lynching or is it going to be microaggressions? But already knowing when they enter in that they're going to be dealing with something, but not quite sure what that's going to look like. And so think about those messages that are conveyed in websites, the narratives that are put out there both in research and what faculty members are saying, in particular around your faculty members and administrators or anybody in the institution's perceptions about Black men and how that formulates how they're going to have an interaction with them. Next point. I want you to think about creating, well, I'm challenging people to create and support efforts focused on supporting Black men. So some institutions already have processes in place where they have these pathway programs to recruit Black men. A lot of Black men come from HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And so there may be some relationships or partnerships that are already established. And so what are they doing within those pathway programs to get Black men that can be used in other spaces for those students who are not at a HBCU or those students who just didn't even know about the pathway program or could qualify for it. So considering the way that you support them there, considering how you support them in your financing, financially as well as in time. Mentorship is very important to Black men. And so what mentor programs are in place, or can we create that? to be able to help that, student organizations. If there's a student organization focused on helping and assisting, well, not necessarily helping, but supporting Black men and providing them a space to really just kind of build community and talk through the challenges and find ways to be able to potentially do research. If that's not there, then let's look at trying to create that. But what I say is Black men, sometimes what happens is institutions consider Black men a special group or part of needing special attention. And what I'm saying is Black men aren't in need of special attention, they just need equitable solutions that include them as valuable paying students. They're coming, regardless of what is really happening, but what they don't want to be treated as different, they want to be a part of what's happening. And it's not the Black men need to adjust and change for the institution, it's the institution needs to go back and change to accommodate the type of Black men that are showing up, regardless if it looks different. So instead of saying, well, I'll get to the next point. Slow down. Change institutional and societal narratives and expectations on Black men. So there was a lot of conversation about perceptions of me as angry when I'm speaking up. So they talked about going to a faculty member. I remember one person said they were going to a faculty member and the faculty member said, he's just so angry when he talks and he's just so aggressive and you can't get far with that type of attitude. And so Black men often have tried to find ways to be able to disagree, but be subtle in their disagreement and not be seen as confrontational because there's a tension or a conflict, which the conflict is not bad, it's just our perspectives are different because we're viewing this through a different lens. And so I'm asking people to really check privileging and how that works. So though as a male you have privilege in this space, Black men feel very powerless because of the salient memories they have with racism and their experiences as being Black, both in society and in education. So how do these narratives that we hear, and so we read on social media, we hear in the media about Black men dictate the ways we interact with them? More importantly, how are they able to establish relationships with other faculty members and their peers who come into their experiences already having ideas about what their interactions and questioning whether or not they will be successful, which is challenging enough to say you have to question whether or not somebody's here. You got to accept it. Obviously, you can do it. But there seems to be another additional layer or another socialization that Black men have to go through. It's not just your departmental socialization, it's kind of a racial socialization they have to go through as well. And my last point is that Black men pursuing PhDs will not do it if there are not Black women present. And so because in this study, when I asked them to provide photos, so in the study I asked individuals to provide me 5 photos, they received 5 prompts. And then the prompts they talked about, provide me a photo of someone that was inspirational, something that represents your educational journey, something that represents where you want to go after you complete it. And so in that, there were more photos of Black men than there were of Black women. And when I asked them about when you conceptualize what it means to be a Black male PhD student, historical figures that they named were all Black men. But when we talked about who's supporting you, who's motivating you, or as one participant said, who look out for the cookout, who give you game, whatever language you want to use, that makes sense to you, it was always Black women. And so what does that say? That from my image of what I'm supposed to be is a Black man, but the tools I need and the support I need comes from Black women. So I'm saying a few things. One, recognize that you need Black women in faculty, administrative, and in student roles to support this group. What comes with that too is Black men have to find ways to support Black women in the ways that they expect to be supported as well. Because they too are going through their own experiences with racism, gender discrimination, and oppression as well. And now they have to also provide additional time and energy to support Black men. And so I think it's important to really consider that. And also we talk, well, sometimes in some of my classes we talked about how you can advocate towards the support or the community work done towards a particular population. So tenure obviously is one of the ones. So one maybe component of tenure is service. So service you do to the institution, service you do to the community. So tying the services done to the services provided to Black men within the tenure process. As well as reward those faculty members and recognize. It's just a simple, thank you, Dr. Means, or we recognize Dr. Means for the work he's done with Black men in Athens or wherever it may be, is to recognize those efforts that's put in place. And also, the responsibility of supporting the group is not solely on Black men and Black faculty members or faculty members who do the work, who do the critical work or who do the identity-based work. It should be the entire institution. If you have it in your mission statement that you espouse the value of inclusion, then it has to be part of the ways that you hire individuals, the way you recruit individuals, and the way that you offer service to them when they're here. So with that being said, that's what I came up with. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Questions, and we'll open it up for everybody to have a discussion. So folks, don't be afraid to ask questions. Justin is not going to fail his defense because you asked him. I promise.
Mom, you heard that.
But, so feel free. I mean, I do want it to hopefully be an opportunity, especially since there are lots of doc students in the room, for you to think about what it's going to be like for you. So please think about questions. All right. Dr. Beans, Dr. Castanel, questions you have? Justin and I have spent a lot of time going back and forth, so most of my questions are answered.
Okay.
So I think you do a wonderful job. So you should be very proud of yourself because of all the hard work. So I just have a few questions.
Okay.
So we'll start off with a more simple question, hopefully more simple.
Okay.
But in chapter 3, you talk about the typical sampling sizes being 8 to 10 participants. You build your whole argument around that in chapter 3, and you have 7 participants.
Yeah.
So how can you reframe that a little bit so you're not relying on the that work from Creswell saying about 8 to 10?
Thank you. Good question. So I think what I want to do going back into the study is actually consider changing the language to be less about the number and more about the individuals and experiences they bring. And so saying, I'm looking for participants who align who find themselves within the study and can actually be a participant more of that focus than on the numbers. I'm still trying to confuse on like how to word that. But I agree with that point because I've seen it in the Creswell book, and I think maybe it was Marshall and Ross may have like 6 to 10 that they mentioned as well. And so I'm still trying to, I guess you could say, wrap my mind around how you talk about what is an exhausted number. And I don't think personally it's an exhausted number. I think it's just about focusing on the participants and wanting to tell that story. So if that story can be conveyed through 3 participants, I think that's still just as valuable as if it was 10 to 20. So maybe I need to focus more on that. And I'll work with suggestions to how to work that.
I think you can just draw information about numbers and really focus on, I think particularly there's work out there from a critical perspective that talks about, this is about stories being told. So it doesn't matter how many stories are being told, but it's a story that's really resistant those narratives about the stereotypical narratives about Black men. So I think you can frame it that way.
Okay.
I don't know what you think.
I would also just add that because you're using critical race methodology, and I haven't read the piece that you're relying on in a while, but it might be good to double check that piece and see what they say about size.
Okay.
They could also say what Dr. Means just said, and then you could just cite them all the way through rather than citing them and then going to Creswell. So that would be another thing to look at. I don't remember if it's in there or not.
Gotcha.
I can take notes for you. I got it.
Put your phone down. All right. Good, thank you.
Dr. Castanel, do you have any questions? Before I have a few more questions, but I want to see if you had any questions first.
Are you there, Dr. Castanel? Yeah, he might. Are you on mute? Aha, there you are.
There we go.
It's like,
And then-
Okay.
My question can wait, it has more to do with the conversation regarding black men and black women.
Okay.
Okay.
I think my questions are headed that way too. Do you want to go first, Dr. Castanel, or you want me to go first?
Yeah, let me go first, because it's more of a general question, actually.
Okay.
My question is that the work was really done from the perspective of black men.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about another group of people, black women in particular, we have to be a little careful how we interpret those things. Did you follow me a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a black feminist perspective that also speaks to the same issues. And that voice is not as obvious in your dissertation. I don't think it's necessary for your dissertation.
Okay.
But in future research, you might want to keep that in mind, sort of broaden your impact as a scholar.
Okay.
And just consider from this perspective, it may not change your outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
but it just gives more deeper heft to your premises. That's all.
Okay. I agree. I was having that conversation yesterday and thinking about that. And I should have framed that this is a qualitative research study using critical race methodology and critical race theory. And I don't have that perspective. So I would agree that, well, I won't say I don't have it, but it's definitely not clear because I'm coming from this research as a black man interviewing other black men. And so I think within that section, I struggled with how to write that up and interpret it because I really wanted to dig a little deeper into what was happening with this relationship. And so I thought it was important to at least name from the participants. It was something that they talked about consistently that I thought was important enough to at least name that as a finding or piece of the finding around the relationships and impact that black women have on black men's pursuit of a PhD. And I think that's also more from when they're actually in the program and less about before, which I want to go back and make it more clear that I'm talking about the pursuit so that can be translated into more of what's happening prior to or the early stages and not what's happening in the latter part of what I'm already pursuing.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
So again, I think you do a really great job, and I really appreciated how you wrap things up in chapter 5.
Okay.
So my questions I'm gonna pose are related to chapter 4.
Okay.
Because in chapter 5, what you do really well is you really bring home the point that there are challenges that exist for black men,
Mm-hmm.
and there's challenges that exist for black students overall,
Mm-hmm.
and you really tie that relationship between black men and black women together really well in chapter 5.
Okay.
So my questions are related to how you can make that come out a little bit more in chapter 4, without placing what I call blame on black women, particularly black women as students.
Yeah.
Okay. So here are my questions for you. I think the biggest one is around this idea. On page 110, you talk about, this is what you write. You say, classroom experiences with black women indicated a lack of empathy for black men's needs, despite the support black men had become accustomed to from prior experiences with black women outside the classroom. So you have that statement there. So talk to me a little bit more about that statement and how you can maybe unpack that a little bit, particularly if you think about the experiences of black women students and everything.
Thank you. I agree. It does. When I went back and looked at that section, that my goal was, and my intent was not to say that black women are the reason why the space may not be as vulnerable in the ways that black men want to. So I appreciate you bringing that particular paragraph or sentence out from that. So how to draw and unpack that out. I think it's important for me to name first that according to black men in the study, they name that there's this struggle in the classroom. And I don't think for me, it's not even clear that I'm talking about purely just a classroom interaction. And so I want to go back and frame what was happening there. It's a classroom interaction with a certain number of black women, and to just kind of, I guess, give context and to say on the back end of that, that it's not necessarily Black women's responsibility to create an openness or vulnerability for Black men. And then I think I also want to, what else would I talk about in that? Just really just name it as this is what was coming from the participants in this section. And so I have some additional quotes that I can think of that start this relationship to kind of, I guess you could say, start the introduction of that particular section of the dissertation, so that someone reading it won't say, well, I can see that this is happening. He's saying Black women are the reason why. And I don't want to do that because they too have their own experiences. And add to Dr. Castanel's point, considering that framing and what I'm saying, to be very mindful of the group that I'm speaking of for, I'm speaking in essence for, because it's my interpretation based on what's said. And I don't have the, I won't say I don't, for me, I don't have the power to determine that or really reference for what those experiences are for Black women. And that's kind of one of my areas I want to research further, is how would Black women name their support of Black men and their relationships with Black men in the classroom, and see if they're the same or different. So, yeah.
Do you think that's a future area for research? I can't remember if you named that. Maybe.
I want to say I did, but if not, I have a slide where I say that's what I want to do going forward. So if not, that might be something I need to go back into and include that in there.
Again, I think you did a really great job
Okay.
of dropping the point home. I think there's like little small things that I noticed in chapter 4 that might, this gave me a little pause. But again, I think you did a really great job, so I don't want you to get me wrong. So my second question related to that is that, so I'll just read the sentence that you have here.
Okay.
You have two different sentences on page 108, and they're related. Although being a woman generally carries very little privilege and power, in some educational spaces where women dominate in representation, their voices have some power. The second one you say on page 137, because women dominate the classroom, Black men's needs had more to do with gender than race. So those two sentences gave me a little pause as I was thinking more so about being careful about conflating numbers with power. Can you just talk to me more about that? Unpack that.
So what I was trying to convey in that message is that based on the number of individuals who pursue PhDs in the College of Ed, there were more women, especially in certain programs, or not, I won't say overall, there were more Black women in programs than there were Black men. So I was trying to set that up to kind of say this is where the numbers are in general as it relates to gender and race as well. And so the other piece of that, I'm trying to remember what you said. What was the second part of that?
Of my question to
Yes.
you. So how do you maybe push a little bit more in your writing to make sure that it's clear that you're not conflating numbers equating to having power?
Yeah. So in the study, I think it'd be imperative to really tease out more what does power and privilege look like in gender roles. And how does that power get displayed when you have certain relationships and interactions with certain groups? I don't know if in the study I talked about power and privileging. I was leaning towards that direction. I did? Okay. So I think it'd be important to to really think about how I frame power in that discussion. Because it's not to say that Black women don't have power or Black men have more power, because I can see that dynamic somewhere showing up. But it's to say that power and privilege looks different depending on the group and individual in the classroom or context. So I don't know, that's a good question that got given me pause to think about it more.
I don't know if you all have maybe had different interpretations.
I think you can also just name it.
Okay.
I think that's one of the pieces that's missing, is just explicitly saying, although numbers don't equate power,
Okay.
sometimes the men in the study, and that's the other thing, is to make sure you're naming it's the men in the study, right?
Okay.
Because this is not a generalizable study. This is a transferable study. And so I think, I mean, it gave me pause too.
Okay.
And so I appreciate this discussion.
Yeah.
I think that, I think when you go back and reread it with this the lens of this conversation, you're gonna see things yourself that you could like change the language of or add. You could refer back to, as I talked about, in the, I don't remember where, but you do a good job explaining what you're talking about when you talk about power and privilege. So you may just need to reiterate it in this section.
Yeah, I agree.
Gotcha.
And be more clear about.
Yeah.
The framing of this from the mid and stuff.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. Yeah.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah, it was incongruent because in chapter. And now that you're saying this, because I do when it goes to chapter 5, I'm like, yes.
I felt the same way.
He said it. But now that you pointed out these specific instances, that's really helpful.
And that was that's the section I struggle with, like in the study, is that, but just this piece about it. And I was really wrestling whether to keep it or not. And I felt like it needed to be put out there. And so I even appreciate this discussion because I was struggling with it. Tamika was giving me a lot of side eyes about it. As we were talking about it in rehearsal, not to shade you, I'm sorry.
I like to help.
Thank you, I appreciate that. You were giving me constructive criticism.
I think that, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my hesitations because I'm a quantitative person.
Yeah.
And I do respect and acknowledge the qualitative and quantitative. But my leaning in terms of quality, I guess this is one of my areas of research interest. And there's just enough information out there, which makes me a little skittish about drawing influence beyond the 7 people you interviewed.
Okay.
What you could, I'm not sure if I'm saying it the best way, but you could somehow, I don't know, I'm not destroying your mental health.
No, you're not.
But you can just make an explicit statement. This is based on 7 people at this one particular university.
Okay.
Because there are 3 factors which you don't keep to the person, but they are 3 important factors. One important factor is whether the institution is a flagship institution or a so-called premier institution versus a regional institution. Urban versus labor. Those are factors that actually that affect people's perception and experiences. The other thing is that what's the history, what's the culture of the institution in question? So it's very possible that one flagship institution at a given moment is more willing to pay attention to white graduate students, like graduate students, and others are not. And that gives it really even deeper because the focus is different.
Okay.
So my experience in educational psychology could be somewhat different than someone else's experience in government or in education administration, because I'm speaking to a very finite number of faculty in those departments. So my experience is really limited to my own reality. And so these are just, I guess what I'm saying is, if you think about what this research lady wanted to really get to the part of the national conversation, I think those kind of awareness, I put it that way, gives more, let's say it would attract more interest among researchers, those who like quantitative and those who like quality. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes, it does. In the one portion that I had of the dissertation, one of the edits, I teased out more about this aspect of setting up additional institutional context, both even within, like if I put according to Saxon's regions, but even being more specific, if I talk about a particular state, if I tease this research out more and say, provide more context around what is the institutional history in the state that I'm researching in. So yeah.
I think it's tricky because you also have to be mindful of not disclosing. I don't care about the identity of the institution. We don't have any loyalty to protect the institution, but you do need to protect your participants. So it's hard to figure out how to provide that historical context in a way that still masks the institution enough to protect them. Just again, I don't care about the institution, but the people kind of, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, but we can talk about it.
Okay.
Or you can try. See what happens.
Before I continue my questions, I do want to let you also know that as I was reading chapter 5, I think it's probably one of the strongest chapter 5 I've ever read. So I do want to let you know that as I continue on with the questions. I know that sometimes questions can really focus on like,
that's fine.
What's wrong, but you did a really excellent job. For me to come in with only 5 questions, unusual for me.
Well, that's a plus.
So I think you did a really great job.
Dr. Means, this is awareness.
We know.
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, you did a really great job. So I have just 2 more questions.
Okay.
And the first one's smaller, but I made a recommendation. So you mentioned Crenshaw's work, Kimberly Crenshaw's work in chapter 4. Talk to us about the basis of Kimberly Crenshaw's work. Just briefly, yeah.
Okay. Crenshaw's work on, I'm trying to think of what I pulled from her.
The mapping the margins, intersectionality.
Yes. So Kimberly Crenshaw is the one who coined intersectionality, and offered me a lot of framework around understanding how people with multiple identities, whether privileged or subordinate identities, impact individuals' lived experiences. And so it's not like people just have a single oppression or something they experience. It's multiple layers of things that could be happening. And so for me, when I thought about the research question of race and gender, I don't see the experiences because Black men name it as they're Black men. They don't say I'm Black and man, which is a bullet point that I had at one point in there. Well, yes, one of the findings that Black and man is different than Black, not equal to man. And so for me, Crenshaw's work really influenced my understanding of how things that are happening for them is through an intersectional lens. Particularly around their classroom interactions, how they were able to give themselves to have a voice or encourage themselves to have a voice and power, and who was supporting that voice that they were wanting to have. That's what I would say.
So Crenshaw's work, what population of people was Crenshaw really trying to talk about when talking about intersectionality and identity politics? Like, which population of people did Crenshaw really initially want to focus on?
I think initially it was women, right? Black women? Yeah.
So how can you name that for us? Because you cite Crenshaw a few times.
Okay.
But you don't ever explicitly say this framework was designed with women of color in mind and the violence towards women of color.
Okay.
So if you could just name that briefly.
Okay.
That would be really helpful as you're citing Crenshaw's work.
Okay.
And my last question, so in one place you talk about, I'll read the quote here.
Okay.
So you say, not really feeling like there was support. Then again, there was another male in the class, but like I said, if there are 2 males and 13 women, some things you might not feel comfortable saying. So that's a quote from one of the participants. Were there any examples that participants gave about things they didn't feel comfortable saying that you can attach right there after that quote?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One that comes to mind is being able to express a frustration with a faculty member. So there were some conversations with one participant wanting to be a part of a particular, or doing some research and being put as the last author constantly. being put as last author in their research study. And the frustrations with that and wanting to really talk about that in classrooms and with discussions with other peers to see if they too were experiencing a similar thing and not feeling like they can really just say what's, the first thing on their mind, and having to really kind of go through this subtle process of being critical of what they say, how they say it. So that was one thing that was showing up.
And was it being conscious of that in relation to, because this quote really is about the numbers of women.
Being
is it
present.
because of the notion that by saying something like that, you may say, well, you're a man and you're arguing for a higher authorship? Was that the
authorship? And then another example, in that particular quote, what that participant was talking about was being one of the only men in this program and not wanting to be insensitive or come off as insensitive. In addition, not wanting, when he says this, when he had a perspective when they were talking about conversations of gender and how they support their clients that they were working with, not wanting to be misogynist or say something too offensive. He was working with a person with a different gender, different social identity to himself. But in the actual space, he just felt like he just couldn't really say what he wanted to. And then afterwards, the quote he talked about was his classmate said, I like the person you are outside of the class. How come that person doesn't show up? And what he talked about next was, I would like to show up in that way, but that person can't show up because then you would take me as a joke, or you wouldn't take me seriously, or you would question my authenticity. And feeling like he was the only one that was experiencing that, although he talked to one of his other peers in his program, a Latino male, and two of the white males, and they didn't feel the same way. So in that instance, he felt like, oh, maybe this is racial here with me, particularly me being Black, because of though it's another Latino, still different experiences. So maybe I could bring in that quote afterwards to really kind of drive home that point of what was happening.
That would be really great. I think it would be nice to have that example of what your participants felt like they couldn't say.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
That's all my questions.
What's your first article you're going to publish out of this?
Where? What am I going to publish?
The topic of your first article.
Ooh, okay. What is the topic of the publish? I really want to, one, I want to talk about the sub-othering piece a lot more. And I also want to talk about, and I didn't bring this bullet point up, but there was one point in the dissertation, one of the findings I talk about is Black male gentleness and how they have to perform this gentleness around how they dress, what they say. Your head nods to echo that. And so costuming is the way I named it. The way I was thinking about it was that Black men have to put on this costume first before they show up just to be taken seriously. And so the impact that that has on them, that just purely around dress, and then bringing in pieces around dress code policies and institutions. And obviously to me, they're always framed from what benefits white men, but talking about how those interpretations of those policies then become the ways that Black men show up in everyday interaction, from their jobs to casual conversations with classmates. Like I was wrestling with this whole thing even today about what to wear to come here, and questioning to myself, why do we have to dress formally for this event or in general, and wanted to just wear something else. I was going to wear like a Black Lives Matter shirt, some Jordans. Because that's what I'm more comfortable. That's who I am, and I felt like the Black men in the study talk so much about visual representation, and that being a part of their authenticity and the ways that they're intentional, like they're not just showing up, putting on stuff the way they just. This is very thought out. So that, and then the sub-othering piece just really bothered me. Just what was happening there. But I felt like I had a lot of information about this gentleness piece, so I want to talk about that a lot more.
Yeah, you did a really nice job with that section. I also think the piece, as you keep working it out, the piece about the relationship between Black men and Black women in doctoral programs is, it would be really powerful. If you get, that would be a really cool co-authored piece with a Black woman in the doctoral program.
Joan, you looking? We're gonna do it.
But yeah, I think for me, those were actually the three that powerful and unique study that I haven't seen in the literature. The way you talk about the performance of gentleness is really powerful.
Thank you.
suggestion. I'm very familiar with the Journal of Higher Education, and they do publish research in that vein from time to time. So if you're looking for one outlet, I think you might get a very favorable response from the journal.
Okay.
What questions do other folks have?
I was going to ask you, can you talk a little about subothering? Because I've never heard that before.
Well, three individuals really brought that out. Let me pull there's a slide I actually have on my other presentation that really got to it a little bit more. Let me see here. So,
Yep, he's
Okay.
pulling up a slide.
so this is what basically I was talking about what suburbing was happening where there's these conversations that Black men have often with white individuals, and they go through this process of like, I don't want to say giving them special treatment or access to certain things, or feeling like I'm the one that's giving you the privilege to be here. I'm the one that's giving you that. And as a result of that, you have to do these certain things. And so there was I pulled this quote out, which we talked about. There's another quote that I have as well, I'm trying to recall. But this is basically the relationship between Black men and their white peers or white faculty administrators, where the subothering piece was showing up for them. And a lot of it has to do with, to me, somewhat meritocracy, the belief that you couldn't have just got here on your own merits. There had to be something that allowed you to come here, or something that allowed you, something that was happening and organized for you. And they named this affirmative action as the reason why Black men are able to pursue PhDs. Also, I think is without explicitly naming stereotypes, but subtly saying, because you don't fit the mold of what I perceive as a Black man, which is what I see in the media, there must be something that good enough about you, and I guess I look at it too as like good and bad, and rooted in kind of like whiteness was happening too around. So because you don't fit that, then there must be something good about you. Because something good about you, then we can have a relationship. Or you must be, or it's okay for you to be able to engage in whether it is research, pursuing a PhD. I'm still trying to figure out what the othering aspect of it is, but something I read where somebody was talking about Latinos being referred to as, or no, it was a study around, okay, here we go. To me, it really resembles the model minority. In essence, it's really what I think it is saying that, which is often to me referenced around Asian Pacific Islander individuals who pursue education in the U.S. As the model minority. And kind of translations of that show itself up here too for Black men, but it is about your performance. So as long as you're performing to a standard I'm comfortable with, then we're good. It's when you get out of the confines of that performance where when I talked about the way that Black men verbally express themselves or present themselves, that's when it became a challenge. Like, oh, well, you're like that, you're like the group that I expected. You know, so yeah. Okay.
So you talked a little bit about emotion. Oh.
Yes, sir.
And I don't mean to drag this so much.
Mm-hmm.
I have to just share my thought, okay?
Okay.
I have witnessed Black faculty being extremely supportive.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also witnessed Black faculty having
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to African American or Black men in doctoral programs.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are speaking about these particular Black men and their experiences with faculty, I don't know if that's a factor in your research or not.
Mm-hmm.
When you say, at least the conversation is suggesting that these Black men are in this place, this space, and they are encountering faculty.
Mhm.
And many times the faculty is unintentionally or intentionally biased.
Mhm.
Well, it's very possible there is a sprinkling of white professors, and it makes it more no different. So I don't know if it's important to bring that up in anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, well, often the participants only name their experiences with white faculty, but they didn't really talk more about their relationships with Black faculty members, except Black women, and feeling like Black faculty were very supportive of them. Because that's one of the questions that I asked is that, do you feel white faculty offer you a different level of support, or support different than Black faculty members, and feeling like the relationships they had were more positive with Black faculty, with Black faculty than they were with white faculty, and wanted to have their relationships and interactions with them as well, was showing up. But that's something to consider.
Haven't seen the inside of faculty life
Mhm.
for many years. I'm very much aware that sometimes our students' applicants can be white.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I've seen a few, but they do exist. Quite frankly, do not support African Americans very well, particularly behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it, I've documented it, it's part of my research. And I can even name names of people in the other education who are outstanding. You have to have one, not me.
Okay.
When it comes to supporting all people, but especially African Americans,
Mm-hmm.
I can also name people who would take you out in like because they believe in a very powerful way what worked for them back in the day is to be replicated.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting psychological issue, but not for you, mind you, but it's one of those things that always nag at me because I actually had a conversation about 15 years ago. I was one of 7 at the time Black deans. Okay. And one of the sidebars we had was, how annoying is it when you have a full professor who's African American / Black, who is really not about students that are African American students. And it's very frustrating because we know what they say and do after. But in front of the public sense, they don't show it. And so we were just commenting on what's going on in their heads. Even when there's no evidence that these particular students are doing anything wrong or whatever, but they seem to hold them to a different standard. So with that said, I'm going to retract. I guess I'm going to retract only the question I had in mind because I think it's a different direction than where you are now.
Okay.
I just want to share an awareness. I want to share an awareness.
Okay. Thank you.
Because I think you addressed very well how you made it quite clear to the subjects that this is what you're looking for as opposed to something more generic question where these little bristlings get because they will be part of the sweat break to get the answer. But I digress. I'm sorry for that, but I just had to say something.
Okay. No problem.
Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you. Yes, sir.
You talked about emotions
Uh-huh.
and how they're not received
Mm-hmm.
for Black males in comparison to Black females.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit more about that?
About how they having space.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we actually had this conversation a lot about is it space or what's happening with that? And so in that instance, what they were talking about, a couple of participants were talking about is wanting to be able to say something and feeling like, so the direct quote that I had was, he said, in this space, I feel like Black women get to have a bad day, whereas when I come in, I don't get to have a bad day. And so feeling frustrated with how he's able to show up and really just kind of release a or be present. And this was just when he was coming to a class. And I'm assuming what was happening or framing behind the scenes is that people were able to come to the classroom, just kind of release and relax and get themselves centered in whatever they're about to get ready to discuss for the day. And just, general conversation. And feeling like emotionally, he wants to be able to be present, but because he's dealing with some things that are happening in other places, he's not fairly able to do the same thing the same way. Or when there are conversations about being able to say, wow, I didn't like this thing, that Black men are not allowed to say it in the same way, or it's not received in the same way. If they perceive it, it's not going to be received in the same way. And so I think that's what was happening with the emotion in the space piece.
The only thing I was gonna say,
Okay.
I was gonna ask a similar question that Dr. Linda said, but if you haven't already, I think some other context is a great publishing and presentation opportunity.
Okay.
Definitely.
Send me your reference list on that one.
Definitely will.
Yeah, I actually looked at one article. I was like, no.
Okay, Justin, you're about to become a doctor.
Woo!
What like advice or what have you learned in this process that you think would be helpful for folks getting ready to do the same thing to know? What do you wish you would have known when you started?
I have to think about it because I'm about to enter into a world where I have to answer that question. What I wish I would have known. For me personally, I wish I would have known how I wanted to be supported and what I wanted my relationships to look like with faculty, expectations. I wish I would have spent more time actually talking to faculty about a few things. One, how do you mentor, advise, and teach different? Because I think those are three very distinct and different relationships that happen. And so I think I would ask students, are you seeking mentorship and what does that look like? Are you looking for somebody who's going to always be there, somebody who's going to push you and drive you? Or are you looking for somebody to have mentor moments where they just kind of give you something, give you a nugget, and then you're going about your way? Financially, that's the easy one. How much it's going to cost? Really thinking through my budget. Wish I would have not taken as much student loans as I did initially, but really figured through that process and be able to figure that out. I wish I would have really thought about how do I perform best? Like, where do I work the best? And so I've learned through this dissertation process, I do better if I sit at a table and do my work. But if I do it in a chair, in a coffee shop, I'm not highly productive. So thinking about how are you very productive before you enter into this process. And for me, it was a struggle to think long-term, like what I wanted to do next after finishing. But I think as much as people can really think about those next steps and they're not clear, I think it takes some talking to people about it and being realistic about how much time you want to devote to this. Because there may be moments where you're able to give everything and there's weeks where you can't, or wherever that is. And participants, again, I talked about how some of them are fathers, some of them are husbands, some of them are traveling, all these things, and I don't have that, but I think it's important to consider, like, if you're traveling or driving, how much of that time commitment you're having to devote to that. It takes away from your job and your family, and remaining flexible. That has probably been one of the biggest lessons. Remain flexible, and remember you're in charge of this process. As much as the faculty and such dictate when you will finish or whatnot, you have to motivate yourself to do it and be driven to really work through this and encourage yourself to write and sit down and write and all that, and talk about being discouraged or not feeling like you're at your best and being able to wrestle with it. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, if we could have everyone step out.
We gotta go out again. Thank you. Oh, you want to say hello? I think he's gonna say hello again.
That should be your mom sending all these text messages.
Oh, we was just getting our
You
life
and your
together.
mom. Okay.
Look,
Anyway,
She watching.
Hey.
She watching you.
y'all sending all these text messages. Mom, it's okay. I'm excited.
Okay.
Hope y'all enjoyed it. That was a fun process and a good chance to really work through and talk through some stuff. So I was excited about that. But man, yeah, it's almost done. Cool. Thank y'all for coming.
We're going to be patient waiting for the results. Okay. I'll leave it on so y'all can hear. I don't know. Whatever you want to say. It's called the Support Squad. Hello? Support Squad. Oh. Well, that was fast. Okay, and we're back.
Milestone completed. Yes, celebration.
Any committee members have something they'd like to say?
Okay.
I think it was extremely well done. So again, good work. And I really think you should be looking to stick with your awards out there. Because I think your work is really well done.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Good work. Come a long way, Dr.
Yeah. A long way. Thank you to y'all in this room. Like, it really means a lot to have y'all support, have y'all here. I think it's rare that I get this, because I was, me and some people walking up, I think I thought to myself, it's rare that I get in the space where I'm with a lot of black men. So I'm excited for that to actually happen and for everything that I've been able to accomplish so far, and thankful for those who were able to watch online. And yeah, this is, it's done. Talk to y'all later who watching.